Would you ask Dr. Cohen Hatton to come back in, please? Please sit down, yes.
Thank you.
That's it, make yourself comfortable. Ready to carry on?
I am.
Good, thank you. Yes, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dr. Cohen Hatton, I'd like to go back again now, if I can, please, to the document, The Future of Incident Command of mid-August 2015, at LFB 00118236, please. Page 35. And let's look together at the third paragraph on that page. And this is underneath the heading Challenge 3, Selection, Assessment and Development of Incident Commanders. And what is said there is this: it is important that a safe learning environment is provided in order to develop incident command skills. Incident command is something that is closely aligned with a sense of identity for many officers. This means that criticism of command is something that can be particularly emotive. Though a constructive approach is essential for development. Fire and rescue services may wish to consider the culture of their learning environment. Aspects such as confidentiality and the way in which feedback is presented should be considered to ensure that the processes and the culture of the learning environment are aligned with the service's desired command ethos. Now, cutting through the euphemisms there, is the basic message which the authors of this document sought to impart, that the LFB should think of ways of training incident commanders without being too critical of them and hence upsetting their sense of pride, which is a hurdle to improvement?
No. The point that this paragraph is trying to make is also reflected in the National Operational Guidance for Incident Command and the Foundation document for Incident Command, and that's how services should consider the impact of their organisational culture on eliciting a positive learning environment. So the point it's actually trying to make is that the expectations that people will have within a service essentially inform the culture of that service. And it's important that that culture considers how it might best elicit people to be open about areas of underperformance or things that they may be able to do better in future, so that you're more able to learn.
Is the observation that's made in this paragraph consistent with your own experience at the time of how officers responded to criticism or feedback on their performance as commanders?
In London Fire Brigade specifically?
Yes, in London Fire Brigade specifically.
I think there were some challenges culturally in London Fire Brigade in relation to the way that feedback was given. I alluded to some of this in my evidence yesterday in the area of my witness statement that relates to the review of PDPs and IMP points and how they're considered to be, how the work that we did found that people considered them to be punitive, which might impact on the way that learning comes about.
Now, you say that there were some challenges culturally in London, in the LFB, in relation to the way feedback was given. Are you describing the culture surrounding the giver of the feedback, the person making the judgment, or the culture surrounding the person to whom it was given?
I think it's difficult to disentangle the two, because the culture of the organisation would encompass everybody and their experiences of it. I think specifically in this case, one of the points that's relevant was that people were given development points, as we discussed yesterday, in a way that for some was seen to be punitive, or it was received in a punitive way. There was also a lack of consistency over the way in which development points were structured or given, or the rationale for them that was given. If I take you back momentarily to the Future of Incident Command document, in the section specifically that talks about the impact of organisational culture on incident command in particular, there is a list of points that fire and rescue services may wish to consider that might impact on how their culture affects their incident commanders. One of the points in there in particular talks about having consistent expectations. So obviously the consistency in the way a development point would be received, or indeed the content of that development point, would be important for setting consistent expectations.
Right. That point doesn't exactly jump out of this paragraph, but you say it's elsewhere in the report. One way of reading the paragraph I've just read to you is to suggest that incident command officers tended to be delicate when it came to criticism, such that the policies needed to be changed. Is that a misreading or misunderstanding of what's being said here?
Yeah, that's not my interpretation of it. The point that this paragraph is trying to make is that incident command is very closely entwined with an incident commander's sense of identity. It becomes part of how they see themselves. So when you're talking about underperformance in relation to incident command, it can be quite emotive for some. So talking about underperformance and creating an environment where you can talk about not just underperformance, but also how a particular performance that might have been satisfactory even could be improved, or how a particular way that an organisation might do something could be improved, should be done in a constructive way that feels like a safe environment, where people feel essentially psychologically safe to be open about those experiences and to be trusting about the way that those experiences would then be used to drive improvement.
I see. You use the word punitive, and I think it's a word that was used by another witness earlier in this module about the response, or to describe the response, emotional response of an incident commander at a performance review. When you say emotive or punitive, particularly punitive, can you just explain a little bit more about that?
Yes, one of the exhibits to my witness statement was a review that we commissioned into how people were receiving PDPs, personal development plans, and in particular how those development plans that would be related to an IMP point would be received. That piece of work involved focus groups. It involved a review of the PDPs that were on the system. So there were qualitative and quantitative measures that were included in there. And the message that came through, in fact, some of the wording that came through directly from staff was relating to a punitive experience.
So some felt they were being punished.
Yeah.
Chastised for perceived underperformance.
Yes, and if I may illustrate a point, one of the examples that we give in that report, for example, was a IMP point and a personal development plan given to someone for having flat batteries in their torch. But of course, the argument from that individual may well be, it's not until I turn on my torch that I understand that the batteries are flat. But that was classed as an element of underperformance worthy of creating a formal development plan.
Right. I mean, was there a sense in the brigade that because of occasions such as the one you've just identified by way of illustration, incident commanders might feel as if they're being picked on or punished in some way? The LFB were trod more carefully in the way in which they assessed their incident commanders and sought to develop them.
I don't think it's a matter of treading more carefully. I think it's a matter of constructively identifying areas that could be improved on. Some of the direct quotes that are included within the review indicated that officers were directed to give development points, or they would be getting a poor review under the PDRS system. There were others that were directed to give out a certain number of development points, or IMP points, forgive me, by a certain point in time. So the feedback from those people were that it was felt that they had to find areas that were areas of underperformance to give an IMP point to, rather than constructively assessing a particular situation or a particular performance and giving a genuine and constructive view on what could be done differently or what could be improved.
Yes, and if we look at the next paragraph here, you can see that it says the way in which underperformance is dealt with may influence factors such as openness, trust, risk appetite, and response to errors. Difficult conversations relating to poor command performance should not be avoided, and an appropriate command culture should support this. The use of operational mentoring and coaching initiatives may provide support and direction to improve both command performance and confidence. This may also be used to drive the command culture set by the service. Did you agree with that?
Yes.
And was that taken on board by the Brigade during your time?
Elements of this were pieces that we had tried to pick up through the PDP review itself, and I think actually it reflects back the areas that were raised in this report in particular. Operational mentoring and coaching was something that we had planned to include under the guise of revalidation. One of the reports that you'll note that's exhibited to my witness statement talks about high scorers in their revalidation incident command exercise being used as a operational a command mentor or a command coach to help support other incident commanders who may not be performing at a similarly excellent standard to that person.
Can we now go back, please, to your 17th of November 2015 paper at LFB 00118186? I'll just put the first page up for you to remind you of it. It's the revalidation of incident command competence, which we looked at before lunch. Can we go, please, to page 6 and look at paragraphs 19 and 20? At paragraph 19, in the first bullet points, you suggest a process for effective revalidation, a three-stage process. Officers' technical knowledge and procedural knowledge is at an appropriate level in this current knowledge test. The appropriate level of command skills are maintained. Incident command exercise. Such knowledge is consistently applied effectively in practice, CPD. And then at paragraph 20 in the first sentence, you say, this paper proposes that these three areas are assessed over a biennial period, with line managers taking responsibility for assuring that officers achieve the required level. That, I think, is that a reference to the biennial process you were giving evidence about this morning?
Yes, the proposal was to revalidate people over a 2-year period.
Yes. Now, you can see what those are. Now, if you go to page 11, you also propose, at paragraph 63, a minimum target of 20 to 40 hours per year of practical experience of incident command. You see that?
Yes.
My question is this. Is it correct that individuals would be expected to supplement their hours of experience of command at real live incidents with appropriate training opportunities?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, and in the last sentence there, you'll see that there's an expression, acting up, firefighters who act up. I take it that means acting in a more senior capacity than their rank.
Yes, there are some firefighters who will not hold a rank of crew manager, but they would take opportunities to act up to the level of crew manager, essentially, and to perform an incident command role at incidents in the absence of a crew manager or a watch manager.
Now, you then go on to paragraph 72 at page 12, if we can just look at that. At 72 through to 77, you set out the proposed assessment criteria for achieving incident command revalidation. And you've got the scoring criteria summarised in table 2. Does that include, and I think it does, action that the LFB could take in relation to those individuals who don't perform well in the assessments?
There is a paragraph that outlines those activities. I can't recall whether it's in this report specifically or in a later report, but it is included in there somewhere.
Yes, I'll show you that perhaps specifically, but before we do, go to paragraph 74, high scorers. Command competent individuals who scored over 75% and satisfactorily complete their command hours would make themselves eligible to undertake the role of an operational mentor to those who would benefit from their support. I think that's what you were referring to as one of your reports which said that.
Yes, that's correct.
There, right. Then if we go to paragraph 77 on page 13, this is under the heading Significant Development Requirements. It says this, commanders who score below 50% fail a retest following their 30-day improvement plan or fail to reach their annual command hours would not pass the incident command revalidation process. These individuals would be passed to the incident command development panel. And if you go to page 14, you can see the conclusions and recommendations there. Now, in short, and I've scampered through this quite quickly, let's look at paragraph 85. Your conclusion is, this paper sets out a process for the revalidation of incident command that will provide organisational assurance that officers are performing incident command at the required level. It also sets out a method of providing an auditable trail of incident command practice and development and encourages continuous improvement through the uptake of professional development opportunities. So, in short, taking this report as a whole, is it right that you were proposing, in full detail, a new scheme by which incident commanders could refresh their existing skills and develop their knowledge further in specific areas against a carefully gradated set of pass and fail criteria with consequences, in part in order to cater for the decline in real operational experience?
Yes, with the slight caveat that it wouldn't cover the full maintenance of skills requirement that all incident commanders should have, which was covered under DAMOP, which sat under the responsibility of the Operations Directorate. So it should work in tandem with that. This specifically looked at opportunities to supplement that with CPD and include that under CPD, as well as the additional opportunities to practice incident command through those minimum levels of incident command hours. So yes, with that small caveat, if I may.
Right. So, and in DAMOP, you'd be given, I think you said earlier, specific training on specific policies.
That would be where those policies would come in. Yes, it would be under DAMOP.
Yes. Now, this report that we're looking at, your report of November 2015, am I right in saying was replicated in a further report to the CMB, the Corporate Management Board, in December 2015, the next month?
Yes, I'd initially presented this report to the Commissioner's group to get some informal feedback from the Commissioner and directors as to the content, to ensure that they were happy with the proposals. They made some suggestions which included, from recollection, a move to a knowledge test every year as opposed to every other year, and they included an additional suggestion for the delivery of knowledge tests through the use of area hubs as well as assessment centres.
Let's look at that report. LFB 00118193, take it in stages. It's dated the 16th of December 2015. It's also titled Revalidation of Incident Command Competence, report by you to the Corporate Management Board, and there's the same summary. And you've summarised in your statement paragraph 68 what this report says. But is it right, as a further summary, that it proposed that knowledge tests and incident command exercises should be implemented from April 2016, and the CPD log that you were recommending should be implemented from April 2017?
Yes, that was what the initial plan had suggested would be a reasonable implementation date.
And you go on in your statement to say at paragraph 69 that the CMB agreed the proposal for a formalised incident command revalidation process and that timescale.
Yes, that's correct.
So to be clear, that was implementation of the knowledge tests and incident command exercises from April 2016 and the CPD log from a year later.
Yes, with the caveat that it was dependent on the time frame for the delivery of the new incident command training through Babcock.
The new incident command training being the CDE.
The revised training that was being developed under the Incident Command Project Board.
Oh, I see, the wider training,
yes.
Not just the exercises.
Yes.
I see. Now, moving on in time, February 2016, you say in your witness statement, it's paragraph 71, I don't think there's a need to look at it, that you provided two updates to the Corporate Management Board, both in February 2016, on the progress of the implementation of the revalidation scheme, yes? And also on the assessment of incident command skills for promotion.
Yes.
Yes. And I think we've called those February Update 1 and February Update 2, or you have.
Yes.
Yes. Is it right that by that time, February 2016, the proposed revalidation scheme was intended to replace the operational assessment element of the current promotion process?
Yes, that was something that was requested by the Director of Operations because of the resource-intensive nature of the command assessments as they were currently run.
Right.
The intention was to explore whether we were able to use the revalidation process to deliver part of that.
I follow. We don't need to look at any of the reports in detail. What I just want to get straight is whether it's right to say that the revalidation project that we've seen in your two reports to the CMB in November and December 2015 were on track to be implemented from April 2016 onwards.
Broadly, initially, yes.
And then I think there were further updates you gave to the CMB on the revalidation programme in June 2016, 8th of June, 1st of September 2016, and then the 10th of January 2017.
Yes, I believe so.
Yes. Now let's just take those in order. Can we look at the 8th of June 2016 update? That's at LFB 00118189. 8th of June 2016. Implementation of revalidation of incident command competence update, and you can see the date 8th of June 2016 on the right-hand side there. Report by you, and there's the summary. The paper provides an update on the implementation of the revalidation of incident command process, which is under the governance of a corporate project, governance level B. This process will provide organisational assurance that officers are performing incident command at the required level. It also encourages continuous improvement through the uptake of professional development opportunities. And then if you go, please, to page 2 and look at paragraph 8. Under implementation, it says this: the CMB agreed the implementation of the knowledge tests and incident command exercises during 16-17, with the CPD and annual hours being introduced in 17-18. A draft policy has been circulated for peer review within the validation working group membership. Comments will be considered, and a final draft will be circulated to directors for approval, then consultation with heads of service. Now, it looks like neither the knowledge test nor the command exercise had yet been implemented at the time of this report, June 16.
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
That's right. Am I right also that the timescales being indicated here, so knowledge tests and exercises in 16-17 and CPD and annual hours in 17-18, have been pushed back from those indicated in your earlier report?
Yes, that's
December?
correct.
Because they indicated deadlines of April 16 and 17.
Yes, that's correct.
What's the reason for that pushback?
We had some difficulty with getting the Incident Command training, the new Incident Command training under the guise of the Incident Command Project Board, implemented by that point. Initially, Babcock had indicated, and you'll note from minutes of the ICPB, that they'd indicated that all of the new training would be ready for April 2016. So when we originally put those dates in place, it was on the assumption that that would be correct. Now, I should say that part of, or the incident command exercise element, we'd intended to deliver as part of the incident command training courses, on the refresher incident command training courses. So the full implementation was very much dependent on the delivery of those new courses. The knowledge test itself was something that initially we had planned to do through officers developing question sets, officers that are the policy holders, essentially developing questions that would be included in the question set. The particular areas for inclusion, I should say, were identified in the development of the knowledge profile for incident command that was compiled by Babcock as part of the Incident Command Training Review. So those knowledge areas that had been identified and agreed would essentially, we would approach the policy lead, the department with responsibility for that policy, to select a number of questions that were relevant to that policy, which would then be compiled into a database of questions which we could then deliver through the revalidation programme. When we were doing that, what we discovered is that we were actually placing a lot more work onto officers who were already quite who were already at capacity. So we didn't get those questions back as quickly as we needed, and we also had to do further work on the questions to make sure that they were all consistent with each other. So in practice, whilst it might have been more useful to go directly to those policy leads, actually in practice it was very difficult to make that work. So we had latterly agreed with Babcock that Babcock would draft the questions on behalf of the Brigade, and that was formalised in a TCAP for them to deliver, for them to develop the question sets and then to deliver the questions as part and parcel of the revised incident command training. So the work that we were doing was very much connected to the delivery of that.
Yes. Now, did anybody at any stage, seeing the delay in the revalidation programme, think to see whether that programme could be disaggregated, separated from the progress of the incident command training, which Babcock were developing?
Yes, in one of the initial reports that I prepared, I think the one that you initially showed me, we outlined a number of options for the delivery of incident command revalidation, one of which were standalone incident command exercises. In practice, that would have been very difficult to deliver across the board, including crew managers and watch managers, because of the sheer volume and critically the number of LFB officer hours that would be required to both deliver those exercises and to assess them. We then considered perhaps delivering only to station manager and above as a standalone assessment, with the additional watch managers and crew managers having a confirmation of skills provided while they were going for their refresher training. The challenge that we had with that, again, were the officer hours that would be required to deliver the assessments. So in discussion with other colleagues, in practice, that would have been very difficult to achieve. Right. It was difficult in practice for us to get enough capacity from people to develop the question sets.
Does it come to this, that in order to get your revalidation programme going, it had to be dovetailed with the development of the incident command training being run by Babcock?
In order to deliver it with the resources that were there, yes.
Did anybody give any thought to expanding the resources so that you could deliver it without being inextricably linked to the delivery of the incident command programme being developed and delivered by Babcock?
Yes, the precise resource requirements that would be needed to do that were set out in the paper in a list of options for for delivering revalidation. So those were considered.
Who decided that it should remain aggregated with linked to the incident command training being developed by Babcock as opposed to being taken and developed separately, perhaps with more resources?
Ultimately, the decision was taken at the Commissioners' group.
Right. Now, let's move on then in time. 1st September 2016, this is your further update, LFB 00110660. And you've explained this in paragraph 79 of your statement.
Forgive me, while you're pulling this up, it was the CMB, not the Commissioners' group, that the decision would have been taken at. Forgive me.
The decision that you referred to a moment ago was taken at the CMB,
the Corporate Management Board,
Board,
as opposed to the Commissioners'
And
group.
just remind me, who sat on that board at the time that decision was taken?
There would have been a range of people. It would be in the notes, which would be appended to my witness testimony. It's in one of the exhibits. Forgive me, I wouldn't be able to recall the precise membership.
It was heads of the main departments.
Directors and heads of main departments, yes.
Now, let's have a look at this report. Let's have a look at what you say in your statement, I think, first of all. You say in the first sentence of paragraph 79, on 1st of September 2016, I provided a further update to the CMB on the implementation of the revalidation of incident command competence. And a copy of the report is exhibited, which you do exhibit. Let's have the report up. LFB 00118190, please. And that is 1st September 2016. There it is. And if we go, please, to page 3 in that document, paragraph 10, conclusion, progress on the revalidation of incident command process has been good, with keen engagement from senior stakeholders. All milestones are currently on track, although it is recognised that some proposed timeframes are dependent on the incident command course review machinery and therefore subject to change. Now, if we go back to your statement, if we go to page 22 again and look at paragraph 80, you say, the report sets out 3 areas of significant progress, including A, knowledge test, which you said was still at the pilot stage, and at B, you say stretch objectives for each level of command are currently being scoped by the implementation working group and will be fed into the incident command course review prior to the development of level 2 and above scenarios. Does that essentially mean that those were still a work in progress?
Yes.
Right. So although the milestones had been met, the fact is that there was still work being done.
Yes, I believe we changed some of the milestones in a later report. We changed some of the timelines that were associated with those in a later report.
Now, if we move forward in time to the 10th of January 2017, there's another update, this time to the Commissioners Group rather than the CMB, as you say in your statement. Now, let's go to your statement at paragraph 84 again. We could just go back to that on page 23. You say there, under the heading Update on 10th January, and you refer to the update and you say it was provided to the Commissioners Group, a less formal meeting that happens in between CMB meetings. Minutes are not taken. Now, if we go to the report itself, that's at LFB 00118194. Let's just have the first page up. There it is, 10th January 2017, update. And the summary again says it's an update on the current position in relation to the implementation of the revalidation incident command process. And if we go to paragraph 10 on page 3, you say this, under implementation. The implementation of the revalidation process is dependent on the Babcock timescales for the development and delivery of the revised incident command maintenance courses. These are currently being developed as part of the incident command training review. The new maintenance courses will be used to deliver both the knowledge tests and incident command exercises for revalidation. Current estimates are that new maintenance courses that will facilitate revalidation will be available to pilot by April 2017. However, it should be noted that this timescale has slipped several times and current estimates may be ambitious. Now, I think it's clear from what you've told us not very long ago this afternoon that the incident command training review is the course review by Babcock, overseen by the Incident Command Project Board.
Yes.
Can you explain, is the explanation for the slippage of several times what you've just explained to us already, namely the speed or lack of speed with which that review was progressing?
Yes.
Yes. Now, in February 2017, the next month, there was a meeting of the Incident Command Project Board. And it's right, I think, that you expressed your concern at that meeting that the revalidation project was being pushed back further.
Yes.
In fact, we can pick this up at paragraph 87 of your statement, if we go to that, please. It's at page 24. Paragraph 87, you refer to the meeting and then you say this, as set out in a number of the ICPB meeting minutes in section A, training above, revalidation was a discussion point at a number of the ICPB meetings with Babcock previously. In a meeting of the ICPB on the 23rd of February 2017, I raised my concerns that the implementation of a revalidation process was being pushed back further. Cara Kelly, Babcock, explained that revalidation requirements will need to be detailed in TCAPs in order that Babcock commence work on introducing revalidation. At the meeting, a number of different delivery methods for revalidation assessments were also discussed. However, an agreement was not reached. Now, can we look at the note of the meeting, the minute of the meeting at LFB 00118192 and pick up the detail? That's the first page. You can see it's dated the 23rd of February 2017, Incident Command TCAP Project Board Monthly Review. You are present, as is Lee Drawbridge, and Cara Kelly from Babcock is there. And if we go to page 2, paragraph 6, please, under the heading Revalidation, towards the bottom of your screen, it says this: SCH, that's you, raised her concerns about revalidation being pushed back further. CK, Cara Kelly, advised that there are limited resources that will need to be considered, and LFB will need to set the parameters as to what is required before this can be agreed. And then in bold, SCH to confirm the requirements so that PD can submit a TCAP to Babcock to cover the revalidation training requirements. What is meant, or what was meant there by the phrase LFB will need to set the parameters as to what is required?
So this was a departure from the position that we'd had previously. As we'd been going through the Incident Command Project Board, you'll no doubt note from the previous minutes that revalidation featured as a standing agenda item.
Yes.
We had previously discussed the requirements under revalidation being encompassed in the Incident Command Review itself. So the new training courses would, in their development, encompass the principles of revalidation, and namely the exercise that would be delivered that we would assess our incident commanders against. This meeting was the first time in which Babcock said that they would require a separate TCAP to cover the revalidation training requirements. It was previously understood that they would be encompassed within that within the review of training itself and the TCAP associated with that. The point that Cara raised that I think is relevant here is that Babcock had limited resources to deliver the training, which we know was to deliver the review of the training and the development of the new training, which was already behind schedule. And I think what Babcock wanted was some clarity of precisely what would need to be included with it, so that they could consider the resource allocation that would be associated with that, which in itself isn't an unreasonable request. However, it was slightly frustrating that it was a departure to the position that we had understood up until that point in time.
Why didn't Babcock make this TCAP point earlier?
That's a point that we raised at the board.
And what was the answer?
That they had limited resources and they needed to set those clear parameters.
Was it essential that a TCAP be needed? After all, you'd done all the work and had identified exactly what it was that needed to be the subject of the training in both your November and December 2015 reports.
That's correct. Nevertheless, we agreed to do the TCAP because it was important to get the process moving. So by doing the TCAP, we were at least able to set out the criteria precisely and start to agree some timescales that were associated with that. So there were clear expectations on both sides.
Right. Was it not the case that discussions between LFB and Babcock about developing the revalidation proposals had already taken place, including how they would be implemented?
Yes.
And was Cara Kelly aware, or was she not aware of what was required?
I believe she was aware because she would have attended the boards. There are previous minutes of Incident Command, the Incident Command Project Board, that included sections referring to the discussions around revalidation.
So why did they need a TCAP?
That was the question that we posed at the time.
Okay, is that another way of saying good question?
Yes.
All right. Now, the minutes go on to record at the foot of the page this. The delivery methods for revalidation assessments were discussed. However, agreement was not reached, as you say in your statement. These discussions included a separate revalidation assessment dates, formal revalidation assessment being formed as part of the MOS course, and revalidation assessments replacing the maintenance of skills course for that year. Scheduling and costs will also need to be considered and agreed. Remote assessments were also considered, whereby an LFB assessor can mark assessments without having to be there. It was also discussed that scenarios used for recruitment assessments could potentially be reused, as they can be fed into the current complement of scenarios. SCH to discuss these considerations with Steve Apter and directors and feed this information into a TCAP. Now, this suggests that you are going back to the drawing board in relation to how the revalidation programme was to be delivered. Is that fair?
No, this was in relation to some very specific considerations. One of the concerns of officers in the LFB was the additional resource requirement that you would need to be able to go down and assess the revalidation assessments. In common practice, it would mean whoever was conducting the assessment, so perhaps a station manager, a group manager or a DAC, essentially taking a day out of their diary to go to either Beckton or to Harrow, where those assessments were conducted, and to directly observe a number of those. Typically, there would be anywhere between 2 to 4 in a day when you were undertaking, for example, promotional assessments where you'd deliver a similar number. So there was a concern about the amount of officer time that it would take to be able to deliver those, and that was a concern that existed throughout the development of revalidation. One of the proposals that I had was to use to have CDs or DVDs filmed of people undertaking the assessment, which is something that was done as a matter of course anyway to assist in feedback. But to actually use those DVDs to score individuals, there is precedent for that. When officers would go down to Beckton or to Harrow to observe the assessments and to conduct the assessments, one officer would be located in the command unit in which the simulation was being undertaken, so they might be very close to that individual. The other officer would be seated in a room separately, and they'd be observing through a video link. So they would essentially be doing all of their assessing, all of their scoring by video link. So it was conceivable to me that you may be able to use a copy of a DVD that could be passed on to an officer after the event for them to perform their assessment and then feed back to that individual. If you imagine that each assessment might take anywhere between 40 minutes to an hour, for one officer to be able to assess 4, which is the number that you would conceivably need to do in a day, it might take significantly less time. That's 4 hours worth of data essentially that you would have to score, you'd have to assess against, rather than an entire working day spent travelling and waiting for candidates in between.
Now, just scrolling back to the beginning of your answer, I think you were illustrating it, but the core of the answer is that you needed an additional resource for somebody senior to assess the assessment.
Yes, or an alternative way of making that assessment which might require less resources than the traditional approach.
Now, was that not something that was envisaged right from the start in your November 2015 report?
It was something that was discussed, but there was a general reluctance to consider that as a way forward.
Why?
Traditionally, assessments had always been done in person, and I think that there was a preference to do that. Now, there might be a reasonable argument, because if you're there in the room, you can hear more clearly, you may be able to observe more things. But conceivably, I think one of the elements that we talk about, and I'm not sure whether it's in the minutes of this or another document, but we talk about the requirement for improved cameras and microphones to try to negate that, so that the quality that you'd be able to observe essentially would be similar to the quality that you'd observe if you were there in person.
Now, what I'm really trying to get at is whether this was a new thing that came up in early 2017, as we can see here, or whether this was something that was foreseen or foreseeable in November, December 2015 when you first proposed revalidation.
It was discussed previously, but informally. I can't recall, due to the passage of time, precisely when those discussions would have taken place, whether it was late 2015 or later on in 2016, but it was something that had been raised and discussed informally in terms of, do you think that this might be possible, would this work? And there was a general reluctance, because there's a preference, I think, for the gold standard, which would have been to observe those assessments in person.
My question really is, why is it, given that this was, as you say, discussed in late 15, early 16, why is it now rearing its head at this point, February 17, as something in relation to which you've got to go away and discuss with Steve Apter and the directors and then feed into a TCAP?
Because again, we were looking at ways in which to ease the burden on officer hours. So it was something that was revisited and suggested more formally.
Right, and the burden on officer hours, was that not something foreseen in the earlier days of this proposal?
Yes, it was, but it's something that remained to be challenging.
Right, but what had made it more challenging in the time between early 16 and February 17?
Nothing. The challenging nature of it remained. We were looking at alternative ways to ease that.
Right, but why could this discussion not have been had a year before?
As I said, it was had informally, but there was resistance to it, so it was left, and we pursued the other avenues that I outlined earlier, namely having officers going in person to observe it. But it's something that I still felt could work, and raised it again. Okay.
Now, let's move forward a month then to the last briefing note you did on incident command revalidation. This is at LFB 00118187. It's dated March 2017, briefing note, revalidation project status report. And this, I think, is this right, was intended to be seen by the CMB, the Corporate Management Board?
I believe so, yes.
Yes, and if you look at page 1 in the second paragraph under the heading background, it says this: following monthly meetings in which all stakeholders and relevant departments have been invited to help shape the way in which revalidation will work within the authority, we have arrived at the final stages of the pilots and reviews. Does that mean that pilots had in fact been carried out, or was that the stage that needed to be completed next?
Some had, yes. So we had the draft policy at that point. This was March 2017. So I hope that I'm going to provide this in the correct chronology, although I'm sure that the various documentations will confirm that or not. But my understanding by March 2017 is we would have had the draft policy completed. The draft policy was circulated to heads of service, and the Director of Operations had discussed the draft policy with the trade unions and was going to take it through the Brigade Joint Secretaries Health, Safety and Welfare Committee, which would be the process by which a policy would need to go through, that relates to anything operational, would need to go through for approval. So that was in the final stages. We had piloted, we'd tested the question sets on people, and although the future development of the question sets was subject to change, we had something that was ready to go for all 4 levels of incident command. We had also piloted the level 3 incident command revalidation. We essentially retrospectively tried to apply revalidation in one of the principal officer exercises. There was some learning that we had from that. It didn't dovetail perfectly, so that was something that we were able to take away and do some more work with. So we were essentially at the point in which we had done most of what we could do in the absence of the delivery of the incident command training, which would have provided the vehicle to deliver the latter parts of revalidation.
Can we then go to your statement and just pick this up in summary form, I think, there, at paragraph 89, which we'll find on page 25. Oh, sorry, 24. I'm so sorry, my fault. Can we go back to page 24? This is where you summarise the update at the very bottom, and then over on to page 25 at the top, you say the revalidation policy was shared with representative bodies and content agreed in the third quarter of 2016 to 17. And the next step was to formally consider it at a Brigade Joint Chair, Health and Safety and Welfare Committee, etc. Knowledge tests, TCAPs, CPD log is what you cover there. And at paragraph 90, then, you say this. At the ICPB TCAP review meeting on the 22nd of August 2017, that's after the Grenfell Tower fire, it was noted that the TCAPs for the revalidation process were almost ready to be submitted formally to Babcock. In addition, it was also confirmed that a stakeholder group for levels 3 and 4 training would be established with Steve Apter as the sponsor, assisted by AC Mills and me. I would extend the consultation beyond the group, and then feedback information. A copy of the meeting minutes is exhibited to this statement. at this point, we're now at August 2017, you're noting that the TCAPs for the revalidation process were almost ready to be submitted formally to Babcock. What did that mean for the implementation timescale?
In terms of the implementation timescale, it would, regardless of the content of the TCAPs, it was still dependent on the delivery of the incident command training. So because it was still caught up in that process, it didn't significantly hinder that in any way, because Babcock still weren't at the point in which they were developing that training.
Right, but a TCAP is usually followed, in your experience, perhaps you disagree with this, but by a period often of lengthy discussion between LFB and Babcock.
It is. I think the difference here that is worth bearing in mind is that we had already had much lengthy discussion with Babcock at the various Incident Command Project Board meetings at which revalidation was a standing agenda item for some time.
Yes, but you said that. I just wonder, I mean, was the TCAP just being insisted on as really just a formal step, a piece of paper to have it?
I think I couldn't answer as to why Babcock had insisted on the TCAP at that point in particular, but it was important to them that we provided it to enable us to move on from that point.
Now, at this point, when did you think that the revalidation process would actually be implemented?
I'd had hoped that it would be implemented as soon as the level 3 and 4 training was established and ready to go. I had hoped that that would be before I had left the London Fire Brigade. The other point that is worth considering with the timeframes is that once the Grenfell incident had happened, much of the activity of London was focused on dealing with the immediate aftermath of that. So some of the priority of activities was somewhat rescheduled.
Right, but Grenfell aside, and we know you left in November 2017, is the answer to the question that you were anticipating that the revalidation process would in fact be implemented by November 2017?
I very much wanted that to be the case at the time, but it wasn't.
Now, even November 2017 is 2 years, in fact, after your initial report to the CMB in November 2015. In your experience of the LFB, by that time, was that a normal sort of time frame within the brigade to progress a project like this?
This was the main project of that scale and scope that I'd been involved with. I do understand that there were a number of change projects that took a long time. One that jumps to mind was the review of the command units, which I understand took some years to deliver on. So whilst I didn't have direct experience of other projects that I was involved with that I could draw as an analogy to this, I do know that there were other projects that involved change across various directorates and departments that also took a long time.
Now, you left, as you've told us, in 2017 to go to Her Majesty's Inspectorate. What happened? I want to ask you now what happened to this project then. I think it's right, first of all, that Peter Critchell took over from you, didn't he?
Yes, that's correct.
As DAC in the AUT team. Who took over as head of development?
Nobody. It wasn't a position that was continued. When I was put into that position, it was created as there was an additional DAC on the rota. So it was an additional position that was created that wasn't continued after I'd moved on.
Are you aware what steps were taken after you left to progress the revalidation programme further?
After I left London Fire Brigade?
You left the LFB?
No, not directly. The only insight I have to that is the reference to it in the Inspectorate report that suggested that there wasn't one.
Indeed, that's June 2019, I think.
Correct.
Yeah. And in their most recent report of February 21 this year, the Inspector, I think, has confirmed that the revalidation process has since been started. Do you know that?
Only from the content of the report, yes.
Right, well, let's just have that up briefly. INQ 30 14795, please. Let's have the first page up to identify the document. There it is. And then we go, please, to page 31. At the very foot of the page. This is under the heading Assessing Competence, and at the foot of the page, it says, since then, and that's since 2019, the Brigade has introduced a more robust way to assess whether an incident commander has maintained their competence. Data provided by the Brigade shows that at the start of December 2020, 66% of Level 1 and 35% of Level 2 commanders had been trained and assessed. The numbers of Level 2 commanders assessed as fully competent has decreased since 2018. The data shows that despite meeting the minimum standard, 41% of the Level 2 incident commanders who were reassessed were put on a personal development plan to improve their competence. When you were working within the LFB on the revalidation process, did you have any view of what sort of proportion of commanders you might expect to see either failing the revalidation assessments or demonstrating a need for further development?
If the revalidation programme was working, again in conjunction with a clear and thorough maintenance of skills programme through DAMOP, one would expect that most, if not all, commanders would have an opportunity to pass a revalidation process, and that would be my expectation. In other services, my experience is that there are very few that fail a revalidation process because they have the training and development prior to that and a clear maintenance of skills programme.
Did you have any sense at the time that you were preparing the revalidation programme in late 2015 out to March 2017 that as many as 41% of Level 2 commanders who were reassessed might be in need of further development?
No, I hadn't considered what the levels might be, although given the level that of incident commanders that passed the assessment process, as we saw in that first report, being 25% the 1 year, 25% the second year, and I think 36% the year after that, I'd expected there to be a need to improve the training and the development of incident commanders. So whilst I didn't expect a particular number, that doesn't land as a surprise.
It doesn't land as a surprise.
No.
I'd like now to turn to something we've discussed a little bit in your evidence, really by way of following up certain things that you've said, but this is personal development plans, and I want to ask you about your role in the creation of a new personal development portfolio, which I think was intended to replace the system of PDPs, which I think have been in place for many years.
Yes.
Now, let's go to your witness statement at page 16, please, and let's look at paragraph 68. And you cover this at some length in paragraphs 50, 58, 59 and 60. It's page 16. I think we need to go back to page 16. Paragraphs 58 to 60. They're on the screen in front of you. I'm not going to read it out to you, but in summary, would you correct me if I'm wrong to say this, that you say that personal development plans, or PDPs as you've referred to them, recorded IMP points, meaning points that had been raised in relation to an individual's performance as part of the LFB's incident monitoring process.
Yes.
And the incident monitoring process is a database or a process which leads to an IMPD, which is the database that the Brigade maintains recording matters normally of concern in relation to performance, either at incidents or during training events.
Yes.
Is it also right, as you say, that you felt that the PDP process needed to be changed for a number of reasons?
Yes.
And the reasons you've set out at paragraph 58, we can read, namely, let's just pick it up, at the fifth line down. The review found that over 90% of the PDPs issued in 2015 to 16 related to underperformance. Significant negative connotations existed with PDPs, the receipt of which was often perceived to be punitive. And this could make the process of meaningful learning challenging. In addition, the review indicated that people who had received a PDP from an IMP point felt that this had a negative impact on their future operational performance, and in particular this may increase risk aversion and decision inertia, as anxieties over receiving an IMP point may distract from the operational goal at hand. Both the National Operational Guidance for Incident Command and the CFOA Future of Incident Command report identify that additional stress and excessive focus on accountability anxieties can have a negative impact on operational decision-making, and these phenomena have been linked with risk aversion. Now, I've read it out all to you because I think, is this right? That describes fairly and fully what you were trying to explain, or were explaining earlier, about the negative receipt by those being assessed.
Yes.
Now, does it follow from that you had concerns that the PDP system was in fact having a negative impact on the effective development of incident commanders?
Yes.
And during your time at the Brigade, did you have first-hand experience of how the PDP system did that?
I had experienced feedback from others, and the first-hand experience that I had was in commissioning the PDP review itself, which, as I've mentioned earlier, involved running a series of focus groups and evaluation of the PDPs that were on the system.
Yes. Now, let's go to a document, LFB 00118188. This is an email that you sent to Graham Ellis, Peter Groves and Lee Drawbridge, as you can see on the 19th of August 2016.
Oh, forgive me, may I just say that's Dominic Ellis, not Graham Ellis.
I'm sorry.
They
Dominic
had different
Ellis.
roles.
Yes, they did have different roles. I think they're both DACs.
They were.
Yes.
Forgive me, no, Dom Ellis at this point was an assistant commissioner. Yes, Dom Ellis was an assistant commissioner.
Right.
Graham Ellis was a DAC. Dom Ellis, in the capacity in which I'm contacting him here, was the assistant commissioner in charge of fire stations in the operations directorate.
Yes, thank you. And if we look at the second email on page 1, this email here, you can see that the subject is PDP meeting. Dear all, thank you for your contribution to this morning's discussion. I think we made a great deal of progress. Just to summarise our discussions and some next steps. And then you say, in the first bullet point, we discussed a model whereby the brand of PDPs are scrapped and we moved to a system where everyone had a development portfolio or a CPD log which captures any areas of development. And then you go on, I will link in with Ronnie and develop a draft policy based on this principle. We will work towards an agreed draft ready for CMB at Christmas and launched by April. It will include the following principles. First sub-bullet, people on development will not have learning outlined in a separate system such as PDP replacement. Rather, learning will be captured on their ePDR, development be a safe space. Positive generic staircase development templates will form a framework for development to other roles/additional skills. Develop clear protocols for use of PDPs that focus on development rather than discipline. Now, in the second bullet point there, you say you're drafting or developing a draft policy, and that would be launched by April, and that would be April 2017.
Yes.
And I think you say in your statement that the rationale behind that development portfolio was to create a system that was, in your words, less punitive, yes?
Yes, that's right. Focused on development rather than punishment.
And would it also be right to say that the intention here was for the emphasis of the new system to be on getting better, developing?
Yes.
And to remove, or try to remove, the previous stigma associated with PDPs?
Yes.
And did you actually go on to develop a new policy?
No, the policy itself, I should say, the policy itself was due to be written by the organisational development team. So Ronnie is Ronnie Laurie, who was heading up that team. So the role that I had was to link in with Ronnie and to assist. So that department owned the PDP policy. So I appreciate, as it's written there, it looks like it's incumbent on me to draft the policy, but I was going to assist in the vein of making sure the points that we were discussing around that particular issue with PDPs and IMP points was adequately captured. That team, the organisational development team, was a very small team with a huge workload. Ronnie reported into Peter Groves, and I'd had several discussions with Peter about the the workload of that team and the development of the policy and where that might sit. And so we'd agreed that actually it would be difficult to bring that forward given some of the priorities that that team had. So we were waiting for the point to come up when that draft policy, which was linked to a wider holistic learning programme, was to be developed, and I would link in with her at that point and make sure that those elements were reflected.
How far had this proposal got by the time you left the LFB in November 2017?
It hadn't got very far. I drafted some suggested changes to the IMP policy that was sent to Lee Drawbridge at that time to be included in the review of the IMP policy, which I don't believe made it into the policy by the time I'd left LFB. Progressing this was something on the work plan that we had when I took over the ORT team. But obviously, given the events of Grenfell, it was something that was pushed back a little bit so that we could continue to prioritise some of the areas that were critical in the response in the immediate aftermath. The areas around the development of the PDP system itself, that was sitting with, as I recall, Peter Graves's team.
Yes, thank you. Now, Dr. Cohen Hatton, you'll be pleased to hear that I've come to the end of my prepared questions. There may be further questions that I've missed that I may need to revisit with you or visit on you. There may be questions that others have. But I'm going to ask the Chairman now to take the customary break and see if there are other questions. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, yes, thank you, Mr. Millett. Well, as you may know, we always have a break at this point so that Council can check that he's not omitted anything, and that those who aren't present can, if they wish, suggest further questions that should be put to the witness. So we'll break now. We'll combine it with our afternoon break, I think, and resume at 3:25, and then we'll see at that point whether there are any more questions for you.
So,
all right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like to go to the usher, please?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Millett. 3:25.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Would you ask Dr. Cohen Hatton to come back in, please? Yes, please do.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Cohen Hatton, I'm sorry we kept you waiting much longer than I had indicated. I'm afraid that was for reasons really of giving people more time to consider whether they wanted to ask you any more questions. But anyway, here we are. We'll find out now whether there are more questions for you.
Yes,
yes,
Mr. Chairman, I just have one question, and it's this. I wonder if the witness could please be shown LFB 00118230. This is the statement of Graham Ellis, and I'd like to go, please, to page 3, paragraph 17 in that document. What he says there, by way of the explanation of the briefing note, which had been prepared by Group Manager Phil Butler, is in the middle line where he says this. It had been, and I'll read it from the second line onwards. The briefing note highlighted the fact that incident command training at the LFB had previously been driven by policy, whereas what was being proposed and being incorporated into the developing ICNOG products was a transformational change in what should be considered when developing incident command training. Do you agree that the changes being proposed in the incident command NOG products that you were developing were transformational?
They were certainly a step change because the focus was moving away from the focus was moving away from process and was more focused on the person. I am unable to quantify what he means in this regard by transformational. I think that's my difficulty. So I'm having difficulty agreeing with the line when I can't quite quantify in what regard he means it to be transformational.
Right. You say it was a step change.
Yes, it was a step change. It would require a change to training. However, that change to training was already scheduled. So to the degree in which it would have been transformational over and above the review that was already commissioned, I think that's the element that I'm struggling to quantify. There was already change programmed, so it wouldn't have been a change over and above the change that was already programmed. That would have been the opportunity to have done that change.
Yes, thank you very much. I have no further questions for you. It only remains for me to thank you very much for coming to the inquiry and assisting with our investigations. It's been extremely helpful to us, and we're extremely grateful to you. Thank you very much, Dr. Cohen Hatton.
And it's right, Dr. Cohen Hatton, that on behalf of all the three members of the panel, I should thank you very much indeed for coming to give us your evidence. I think we've all found it very interesting and very helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
And now you're free to go.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Millett. Well, we do have more witnesses to hear, but perhaps not this afternoon. Is that right?
No, that is right, Mr. Chairman. Yes, the next witness will be Assistant Commissioner Hughes, who will be taken by Mr. Andrew Kinnear, Queen's Counsel.
And he'll be available tomorrow at the usual time?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Well, in that case, we'll close at this point for today, and we shall resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning with our next witness. Thank you very much. 10 o'clock tomorrow, please.